Good afternoon. Good morning, everyone. Thanks for joining us for our webinar today, From Import to Expansion, How to Scale Work Instructions in PICO. Our presenter will be our head of product at PICO, Steve Wishaw, and I will let Steve take it from here.
Thanks, Shayna. Hello, everyone. Thanks for joining us. I'm looking forward to diving in today on the exciting topic of work instructions. We wanted to get a baseline of, how you all are, creating your work instructions today. There's a good chunk of you that are in the Excel, Google Sheets world, about a third, and then maybe another third each between PowerPoint, Google Slides equivalent, and then the Microsoft Word, Google Docs equivalent as well. There's another, let's say 10% ballpark that's utilizing an ERP system or some other, management system for these work instructions. But the large majority here is what we typically see across our customer base when they're first getting started as well. There's a good chunk in the Excel Google Sheets world that is, let's think of it as a very tabular format of I have a list of materials I'm building with. I need to have some level of custom formatting, but by and by it's a largely sheet-driven structure of here's a bunch of parts that I'm utilizing. PowerPoint and Word are a little bit more in the regimented ISO 9001 or specific formatting world where we want a little bit more version control, a little bit more articulation in what we're using to capture the content that we need to communicate to our assemblers, technicians, machine operators, what they're building in some level of sequence. Of course, those systems aren't without their challenges, which I imagine is why a large majority of you are here with us today. But we'll kind of dive into the overall usage and structure of each of these specific items. So, as you might expect, no two set of work instructions are the same here. We've seen things ranging from flowcharts to the equivalent of paper binders out on the shop floor to for those that have seen our How to Build Smarter video series, there's a set of 3D printer work instructions that are a never-ending scrolling PDF document with a bunch of pictures. And those that build that IKEA furniture at home will recognize that image on the right as well of a very pictographic, heavy, language agnostic type instruction. So why we're showing this is that there's not necessarily a one-size-fits-all approach to work instruction imports because there's different formatting options even within the Word versions, within the PowerPoint, Google Slide versions, all those text box images, layering of images, all of that content is not usually in a standard format. Of course, there are options to be able to do so, but we want to be able to articulate, how can we take very digital based work instructions that are, occasionally, printed out, like you can see in that second image on the shop floor, or hosted locally on PCs or client PCs out on the production floor for operators to pull up. How can we translate what we're doing today to a maybe more standardized format like PICO, where we can truly engage with the operator, capture that cycle time properly, but stay out of the operator's way as well and not force digital engagement when there's comfort with the process, but still capture that relevant traceability information. So how do we take this type of structure in a very varied world, and how do we translate that into a standard PICO structure? So there's a couple different ways that we want to at least talk about here. There's always manually copying and pasting and going through into PICO directly, and we'll be able to get into the platform a little bit later just so you can see what that sort of looks like. But when we talk about MES in the manufacturing world, a lot of folks get into the consultancy world of how do we go from what we're doing today to a standard system that often relates to months, sometimes even years of conference room pilots, making sure everything's ready before we hit the go button. But when we start talking about, modular next generation error proofing and manufacturing solutions like PICO, we want to enable that crawl, walk, run approach of we don't necessarily need to enable the shop floor all at once. We want to target pilot lines. We want to target specific issues that we're seeing on the shop floor with better work instructions, IoT tool connectivity, and other items. So what we really want to enable is when I have a large set of existing structures and formats, how do I standardize that and make it available for import into PICO? We've mentioned alternative solutions here, Word, Excel, PowerPoint, PDF. We have had success, we being PICO, importing directly into our system from platforms like Delmia, which is a very structured bill of materials, general operation structure of assembly operations, or other digital platforms like Dozuki, which again is a very standard formatted structure. All of those are options to be able to import into PICO as well. But we want to talk about specifically the catch-all bucket here of how many different options do we have available to us for capturing what we're using today into PICO. So I'm going to transition to the product directly here. So available on picomes.com, there is a resource to standardize work instructions for import into PICO. We do have essentially a recommended, let's say, structure to be able to import these things with a step-by-step guide to be able to do so. I'm just sharing this as what you can expect to see when you download this later on to be able to, how do I format some of these instructions and carry this into PICO directly. But what I'm going to pull up first is just a reference, and this is a standard PDF. As I mentioned, this is going to be a PowerPoint or Google Slides equivalent of that presenter view. What does that image look like? What does that step view look like? If there's any text associated with it, do we call that out as well? I want to make sure that we're operating just off of a baseline expectation of what does an example work instruction look like before we start breaking it down into PICO. So that format that we're describing in the standardized work instruction, again, it doesn't have to necessarily be this. This is just an option for that general catch-all bucket. We want to start translating that text, all these images that are saved as part of our process here, any associated bill of materials into that JSON format. I know this is a very text document heavy view here, but when we start translating these options, we want to be able to see what does a code-based version, or in this case, a JSON script look like when we start formatting our structures properly. And this is a very, just text document view of this. For those of you that are more familiar for inline code editors, it's a lot easier to manage. That'll, group these together for you. But what we're essentially doing here is translating this process in this, simple, relatively simple three-step process into a structure here so we can see what our process is named, how many steps there are, and if there's any bill of materials that we want to call out, we can certainly do so. It's not required. We can leave those blank as needed to make sure we're capturing our relevant information as well. But this is a way for us to take that structure, format it into the appropriate way. So when we hit that work instructions API to be able to import a structure like this, we get the result of, I had that running in the background, to install this process here. So we can see our images associated with our process here, as well as that text that's called out and any relevant bill of materials associated with it. So on this third step here that was imported, I can see that I have a bill of materials here. I can have this in the step description and expand it for the, the operator here. So when I'm looking at displaying that information, I have that part number, that relevant set of information associated with my process here. Now, this is a fairly flat import that I can see all of my text and I can see what my process actually looks like. From here, we want to start actually enabling a more digital interactive work instruction that you might expect from a either printed out document or a standard flat digital file. So what I mean by that when we're talking about the overall structure here is how do we enrich this document to be able to go back and forth to what our, next gen work instructions look like once we've passed that initial import. So I'm going to go back and forth between the slides a little bit here. But just from a very high level, how do we make sure we are utilizing the right method here to import? So we want to make sure that we're importing that script. As I mentioned, it only takes a couple minutes and was running in the background while I had that up. We have that manual cleanup. There's really no additional content that we need to add in. It's all mapped to the appropriate fields. And more importantly, when you're structuring these files for import, we want to make sure we have that standard data set available to make sure what's important enough to actually import into PICO. And I'll touch on this in just a second because all of that extra language of make sure you do this, a lot of arrows, a lot of circles, a lot of, let's say, navigate the document to figure out what's important type context, all that starts getting eliminated when we start layering on additional content to those work instructions. So when we start talking about that import, how do we want to enrich these documents in a way to make sure we're highlighting the right things? So of course, all your standard PowerPoint, Google Slide, Word, Microsoft, Google Suite tools are available for you. You can see those on the toolbar here for arrows, lines, circles, rectangles, whatever you need. But at the end of the day, we want to make sure that we're enabling the folks that today's maybe my second, third day on the manufacturing line once I've done my initial training. When I'm, connecting a wire harness, if I've never heard the term wire harness before, or what, a bracket looks like, or what a QR code actually is in the context of manufacturing serial numbers or lot numbers, how do we start adding in this content to be able to do so? So I'll toggle back to the demo for just a second so we can see some of this information. When we want to highlight a section of this, this diagram, or call out specific text features, all I have to do is highlight that section of text and then create it as an alert or a note to make sure that, yes, we want to make sure we're not over tightening those screws. So again, the standard PDF PowerPoint document is you're probably going to throw that in extra large, extra red, extra bold text with a bunch of exclamation points that says don't over tighten these screws. Once I've seen this document a few times, or even if I have this document up, that information might start fading into the background a little bit. As if I'm pulling out a specific harness or where this needs to be installed, if I want to show what that into place looks like, again, I just need to highlight that text and highlight a section of that main image to say, where am I snapping that into place? And this concept applies to, whether it's, adding in specific serial numbers or, calling out which QR codes I'm expanding. So when I am an operator and I'm viewing these instructions on my build screens, instead of deciphering, just throw an arrow on here just to show an example in comparison here. Let's make this a really bright yellow so we can see what this looks like. When I get to this, PowerPoint instruction, I get to this step and say, I see a large bright arrow. Does that mean it's the Phillips screw? Does that mean it's the bracket over the harness? Is that the screw hole in the lining? We don't necessarily know what these arrows mean. When we start highlighting and linking information, it makes it a little bit more clear, a little bit more interactive. This isn't a required step necessarily. If I've built this 10, 20 times and I'm familiar with the process, I don't have to constantly come into my work instructions, acknowledge I did this, I did this, I did that. We have the ability to layer in that content to be there for the folks that need it, but not require those experienced operators to scroll through or go through all that information. If they're just looking to torque some bolts down, here I'm going to add in an action to include those screws. I'm going to put in an action to say I need 4 screws, and on the torque tool I'm using, it's on program number 2. It allows me to start structuring my content here to be able to use those connected tools, use those expected devices, equipment at the station instead of having those specifically called out in the work instructions. I can say, all right, I am fastening some screws and I am doing those here, 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 and here, as just an example, right? But it just allows us to call out that content and make it a little bit more interactive, to not have to constantly be changing these text fields to reflect everything that's going on. Of course, I can always align different screw holes if I want to call out another image here. Instead of highlighting a section of that main image, I can grab another image from the PICO media library to say, what are these actual relevant images associated here? So I can, if I want to bring in that image again, I can rotate it, do a different angle, make a different image, zoom in, out, do some cropping, whatever I need to make sure this content is available for me. The same, principle here is I can put additional items, shapes on here as well, or even call out additional annotations of saying, this is the QR code or a bill of materials reference that I want to call out. So this is a very interactable digital document instead of what you would consider to be a static PDF or Word document for capturing this information. So these are just a few ways to take that, flat, static PDF, Word, or PowerPoint document and make it a little bit more interactable for the operators. And we Pico have a lot more content on how to make these work instructions a little bit more experienced operator friendly as well. We're just talking about how do we enrich our documents with as much information as possible, again, while staying out of the way of the operators that might not necessarily need that information. So I'll come back to my slides here to hit on a few additional topics here. Because in the work instructions world, we have a very, for those of you in high mix, low volume environments, and that, volume number might be different for you all, but that we have some tools in Pico that we call it our templates and variant structure to manage a series of products or series of processes to link them together. So you're managing a set of work instructions rather than 20, 30, 50 different part numbers that are all 85, 90% similar, but might have different lengths, different screws, different connectors, whatever that may be. We want to make sure that we're managing essentially a master copy with variations on each one. So what I mean by that is when we're talking about a clutch install here that's shown on the image, maybe our torque programs are different, or we're using different brackets or housings to be able to support all of the different vehicle models this goes on. For all of our standard set processes that are equivalent, whether that's scanning the chassis ID that it might be part of, or setting the ID or communicating with external systems, all of those images, all that content will remain the same. When we start managing our different part numbers and variants, we can essentially deviate from that template for each of those options or variants available to us. So we can individually manage all of our torque programs, all the quantity of bolts that we're doing on a per part number basis without necessarily having to manage 30 different work instructions. If I'm changing, an overall revision or a picture of that top level product, how do we make sure that we can just change that in one place instead of propagating it through all 30 of those variants manually? So this is an example of being able to take one set of work instructions. Let's say you have a master part number. You can import that into Pico as your template and then make your linked and unlinked modifications as needed to use these next gen tools instead of managing, again, a set of 30 to 40 different unique sets of work instructions as needed. I mentioned fastening tools as part of the example, but because Pico's value proposition lies very heavily in its industrial tool connectivity label, we want to make sure that the tools that you're actively using on your shop floor, whether they're barcode scanners, precision fastening tools, label printers, we want to eliminate that integration and code work from your teams and choose those plug and play tools and devices available from the Pico library. So when we're talking about this import mechanism of work instructions, how do we not only layer on that extra digital content, pictures, videos, other standard procedures, how do we get that information directly from the tool? The GIF that's been playing here on this slide is showing how easy it is to configure some of those tools. We want to see, I configured a torque tool earlier, but really, once these processes are assigned to a station, those stations have tools associated to build at. How many tools do I have at those stations? What fastening operation am I going to do with said tool? So we're just using these configuration managers and action configuration wizards to configure all of this content for us instead of having to go through, do integration after integration with our work instructions and our tools. This is kind of a plug and play interface. What tools am I using? What are available at each station to be able to call out exactly the actions and get the valid information, measurements, whatever that information is coming from those IoT tools directly back into our work instructions in our data set. And we've got a wide range of other data connectivity and how we manage our data intake and traceability as well. We're just focusing on work instructions today, but all of this tool input rolls right into our top level structure here. So from a next steps perspective, there's a way to get started on free digital work instructions right away at picomes.com/try for free. You can sign up to start working with the PICO version of work instructions today. It's on a essentials subscription plan to be able to access that automated import and other features, which is available there as well. That work instruction import template that I mentioned is also available on our website. You can see it directly on the link here. It's searchable on our website to be able to find it very quickly as well for any imports we are looking to achieve. So I think we can maybe Shayna get into some questions here with the time we have left, and I can go back and forth between either the product and some of the slides we've covered to answer some of those questions.
Okay, great. Yeah, we have a few questions. And just so everyone knows, at the bottom of your screen, there's a little Q&A icon. That's where you can submit your questions live right here, if you haven't already done so. But our first question is, how long will it take to format my data into the JSON script? Is there a way to automate this part of the process?
Yeah, that's a great question. So when we start talking about changing our structure to support this format, sometimes the Word documents you have available have that in the table of contents or in the Google Slides or PowerPoint. All of this is available into, paste in all the steps at one time, paste in all of the, bill of materials all at once. All of those are accessible options. We kind of mentioned that the because there is no one size fits all version for work instructions, it's a little bit more challenging to take an import model into the AI age that we're living in now. But AI tools are better at putting things into a standard format like this. So if you have a relatively standard format within Excel, Word, PowerPoint, again, using those LLM type tools to create a structure like this does save quite a bit of time for setting it into this specific template. And this is, again, primarily coming from Google Slides or Word or PDF type environments where you might need to mine some of that content out in a little bit more efficient way other than manually going through. But it's a pretty quick process once you get the template all set and ready to go. There is a way to kind of manage that structure to be able to make it importing. And once you have this structure, it's just a few minutes to import into Pico from there.
Okay, great. Thank you, Steve. Next question is, can I bring in additional documentation to support my digital work instructions?
Absolutely. We talked about pictures a little bit here for bringing in, highlighting sections of the main image or additional videos. There's always options to, as I mentioned, there's options for bringing in videos to support every step in the work instructions and have that available as well. But if you have, assembly drawings, standard operating procedures that you want to bring in, you can always bring in a static PDF into your document if you're comfortable with the version control. That's always something that can be linked in and referenced here as a PDF within the work instructions. Additionally, we do have the options of going to because once you start talking about, on-prem deployments and managing, IoT connected tools, we want to enable the connections to your shared drive if you'd like for managing the correct location and correct revision. So if you've got, constantly updated drawings or standard operating procedures that you want to make sure you're always referencing the right one, we can always link to that external site to say, where is the SharePoint link? Where is this a additional external to Pico, local to you document live? So we can bring in some of this additional content to augment those work instructions that might be referenced as part of your nested work instructions.
Okay, thank you. Got another question. How is data captured and recorded from my tools?
Yeah, great question. So I'll actually toggle over to the device library here to look at a few different options. So I mentioned all of the connected devices that are available as part of Pico's architecture, and I'm going to go down to some of the precision fastening tools as I move my little camera video of myself out of the way so I can actually access the scroll bar. So there's a variety of different tools, and I'll just focus on precision fastening here since we've covered that in some level of detail here. But any brand that is commercially available on the market will typically be in the library. If it's not, it likely will be sooner rather than later. But when we start capturing information from this equipment, and it doesn't have to be necessarily precision fastening, it's all coming in via industry standard protocols. I mentioned torque tools because the large majority of them use a protocol called Open Protocol. We get all the fastening results directly from the controllers, sometimes from the tool themselves, but usually in the case of, pick your flavor of tool brand to be able to receive the results from. For other measurement devices and equipment, let's say, you're an electronics or battery manufacturer and you have some high potential testing, some air leak testers. All of these are typically either Ethernet IP or RS-232 USB connections, all operating under a standard industry protocol. So if you have a device that's capable of communicating digitally, again, via Ethernet, USB, or wirelessly over some standard industry protocols, it's likely that we've already seen it in both standalone equipment like these or automation cells that are supported by, ignition PLCs or other. We can receive that information and log it as part of that data table. So any builds that we have, part of the data record here, are all associated at this data level. So we can see, the cycle time, the operators. I haven't had any builds reported as part of my new import here, but I can see which operator, what station, my step-by-step cycle time, and any results that are associated with that. In this case, it would be a torque tool if I am configuring one of those options, but at the end of the day, it can be a photo, a measurement, a barcode label print, really anything that is capable of communicating, we can receive that information and bring it as part of that data record.
Excellent. Okay. One more question. Can my work instructions be exported from Pico?
Absolutely. So any version of any process within Pico, and when I say version, any historical changes that are saved and deployed to the production floor can be downloaded as a PDF. So all of that content, even if you've got 1, 10, 1,000 processes, it doesn't matter to us. That full historical record can be seen from the data record or from the process management screen I just had up as well. So if you'd like to export anything from Pico and do another, quality management system or record keeping system, all of that optionality is there for you as well.
Great. All right. Thank you. I think we've got one more question. Can a failed QC check cause a label to be printed?
Yeah, we have some optionality for when things fail, what can go wrong, and that can require let's say an NCR or an NCM to be recorded saying, okay, something failed. Do we need to create a non-conformance, potential scrap ticket for this or go into MRB? Do we want to require a photo to be taken of does this, for a, external ticketing system or part of that data record, can I show that as well? Or to your point, can we generate, a serial number or an optional action to be able to say, this is the build I'm working on, under serial number this, go ahead and print out that label to say that this is my, quality ticketing information that's associated to that high level serial number, work order, job, whatever it is, that identifying number that I'm working on.
Thank you. All right. I think we are at our time and we have answered all the questions. So I'd like to thank everybody again for joining us today. There's going to be a very short survey that pops up as soon as this webinar is over. If you could just take a few seconds to fill that out, it helps us plan for our next webinar. So thanks again, and thank you, Steve. Have a good rest of your day, everyone.
Thanks, everybody.